I wonder if you've seen this a lot recently. See, this is the sparkle emoji. And over the years, it's been used for a lot of things. Magic, fairy dust. Samsung decided to use it for fireworks one time. And more recently, since maybe around 2019 or 2020, I started using it for other things. Sometimes it was just to add some flair. Sometimes it was just a vibe or a sparky response. I can't even really tell you what, but maybe that's the entire reason that it's good, right? Because whatever I'm trying to communicate with this can't really be described with words. Anyway, in 2021, the internet started using this thing constantly, this time as a form of emphasis, some irony maybe. But the popularity of this thing took off. So much so that for a time it took the number 3 spot of most used emoji in the world, according to scraped Twitter data. And it took that from the pleading face emoji. So you know the internet was hot on this thing. And that's great. We're vibing, we're having fun, we like the emoji. But then in late 2023, something happened.
Our main story tonight concerns artificial intelligence, or AI.
And as AI gets better and better, it's only going to make it more difficult to separate fact from fiction.
Despite what you hear about artificial intelligence, machines still can't think like a human. But in the last few years, they have become capable of learning.
AI.
AI. AI.
AI.
AI.
AI.
AI.
In 2023, AI became the thing. It wasn't crypto or the metaverse or the Internet of Things or 3D TVs. It was AI, and it still is AI. Seemingly overnight, that emoji that I used to add that spice that a lot of the internet like to use for drama and excitement and sarcasm, suddenly it was used to signify artificial intelligence. Almost every single feature that shipped in the last year and a half has had that sparkle emoji slapped onto it. Features that claim that they're AI featured. And you know, maybe they are. Is it the new kind of AI that set off that chain reaction in the industry? Transformer architectures and large language models and stable diffusion? Sometimes, but also sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just the same old automation and machine learning that we've been using for decades. And sometimes I'm not even sure you could consider some of this stuff AI at all. But my point is, why the sparkles? Why did this industry decide to bootstrap my favorite emoji as its new mascot? I mean, there are a lot of options. So I started looking into this, and at first I was working backwards, going back week by week, month by month, year by year, looking for some indication as to why this industry decided to ship the sparkle emoji with every single new feature and update. And I found some early examples, like in 2020, Google Photos added this sparkle emoji as a button on the auto enhancement feature. And before that, in 2018, Twitter added this algorithmic timeline button with a sparkle on it that switched you between news feeds. And before that, Google added a single sparkle to Google Docs for its Explore feature, which, to be honest, looks a hell of a lot like the new dazzling AI enhanced features that we're seeing right now. But you know, working backwards has some limits. Right? Like you can search for days or months. And yeah, maybe you'll find some pretty early examples, but then you find fringe things like the fact that GE Healthcare has apparently been using the sparkle emoji since before any of these things. So if I can't figure out when, I guess the question I should be asking myself is why? And why requires context, right? So let's go back before ChatGPT, before Twitter or Google or any of that. Let's go back to when the sparkle emoji became an emoji in the first place. All right, so every character that we can display on our devices has to be represented by numbers. That's how computers work, right? A series of these ones and zeros are vectors. They're pointers that point to other things. Like if you're using the capital Latin letter A, that's represented by U plus 0041, because A is just a picture. All alphabets are pictures. Fractions are pictures. Emojis are pictures. Like if you're referencing anything from a keyboard onto a computer, that computer needs to know what symbol in the huge database to point to. The Western Armenian capital letter Kim is U plus 0533. The fraction representing 2/3 is U plus 2154. And the sparkle emoji? Well, the sparkle emoji is U plus 2728. Every character that you can represent on a computer is stored in a huge encoding matrix called Unicode. And getting a new character added is not a small situation, right? You've got to draft a proposal, present to a committee, get approval. Like it's a pretty huge process. So sure, maybe adding an alphabet is a pretty easy ask, but adding an emoji is a whole separate situation, right? Like you've got to prove that that emoji is culturally relevant and significant. And if we just added every emoji we had an idea for, that encoding matrix would be infinitely larger than it already is. But every once in a while, new emoji does get added to Unicode, and eventually everyone gets the same ones. Maybe not the exact same representations, like those are decided by the platforms, but I should be able to send you a sparkle emoji and you should receive the sparkle emoji. So okay, if we look back through the emoji versions, trying to find when the sparkle emoji got added, we can go back and back. We know that it was in emoji 15.0. Turns out it was in emoji 5.0. And if you go back further and further, it turns out that the sparkle emoji is in emoji 1.0 in 2015. But we were using emoji before 2015, right? Like this is clearly not a new concept. And the answer to that is yes. But it's also that 2015 was the first year that Unicode thought that emoji were important enough to spin out into their own numbering scheme. So even though 2015 is when emoji 1.0 came out, it actually came out alongside Unicode 8.0. Fun. So it turns out that Unicode has actually supported emoji since Unicode 6.0, which was released in 2010. And guess what? The sparkle emoji is there too. So okay, we tracked the sparkle emoji back to Unicode 6.0, but that still doesn't really explain what they mean, right? And also if you look at all the other emoji that were released in 6.0, there's a lot of random stuff in here. Like, what is this symbol? And what does this mean? And why is this here? Like, if I were to go and decide these are all the emoji we're starting with, I'm just not sure that I would have included the sparkles. But then I found these documents. In February 2008, a team of Google engineers led by Mark Davis submitted this document to Unicode. He was trying to get them to add emoji as characters that Unicode was officially supposed to handle. Unicode had previously said that it was a little bit out of their scope, but this time it was a little bit different. Mark and his team weren't just asking Unicode to support emoji, they were submitting a document that pretty much laid out the encoding of every emoji that existed at the time. You might notice that there are 3 different versions of each emoji in this document, with one of these 3 being proposed as the Unicode representation. And if you keep digging, you'll see that, maybe unfortunately for me, Mark's grandiose emoji creation effort was not a single emoji creation effort. It was, maybe more fittingly, a unifying emoji creation effort. Because before Unicode, there wasn't just one single set of emoji, there were multiple. Before Unicode 6.0, there were 3 major competing emoji sets pretty much exclusively in Japan. But instead of having a standardized encoding for how all these emojis should be displayed, each of these companies just kind of made stuff. Like sometimes they overlapped, but not always. And this was not a good situation. Like sometimes you'd send an emoji to a friend on a different telecom and they'd receive a totally different one. Sometimes one of the telecoms would make a similar, but not exactly similar emoji. And sometimes you just receive a pile of garbled nonsense. They even made a term for this called emoji bake. So Mark saw this and thought, okay, well that's not good. Like let's not do that. But let's also not redo all of the work that these Japanese telecoms have been working on for, I don't know, decades now. So Unicode just kind of took all of the emoji that these telecoms made and encoded them into Unicode with its own representation for each. And then proposed it in this new document. And guess who's there? But if all 3 of these companies have a sparkle emoji, one of them had to make the sparkle emoji first, right? Like assume one of them made it, got really popular, and then everyone else copied them. So I'm searching all these names, and immediately one of them pops out to me. According to the New York Museum of Modern Art, the original set of emoji was made by NTT Docomo, and they have them displayed in the museum. The New York Museum of Modern Art is in New York. I live in New York. I think you can see where this is going. Okay, so as you can see, there are a ton of emoji here, 176. You've got all the classics that you'd expect to see, like the heart, the sun, but there, right there, is the sparkle emoji. So the MoMA says this is from NTT Docomo, and they actually have a whole book and tons of information from emoji's creator, Shigetaka Kurita. So the story goes that NTT Docomo, Mr. Kurita's employer, was working on this really early form of mobile internet called iMode way back in 1997. And remember, this is way before smartphones or anything like that. So we still had flip phones with an extremely limited amount of space. Now, when you have limited space, Mr. Kurita had this idea to create emoji, with E meaning picture and moji meaning emotion, to really take advantage of those small screens. And remember, this is way back in 1997. So it turns out these AI companies aren't using something from 2021 or 2015 or even 2010. It turns out the sparkle emoji is way more OG than that, way back to the original set of emoji in 1997. But then how did something that was made in 1997 become the symbol of our current future? Like, it didn't originally mean AI, right? But then what was it for? Like, what was the sparkle emoji for? You can ask a lot of people, and they're probably all going to tell you slightly different things. Some people might say it's magic. Some people might say it's just flair. But I think the only way to actually figure out what it was for is to go ask the guy that invented it.
Used in that way. So if it existed, あります。
Thank you. Hello, and my name is 重高栗田。私が、絵文字を、開発したんですけれども、今はですね、日本の動画プラットフォーム、動画とか生放送のプラットフォームであるニコニコという会社の、仕様をやっています。
How did you decide what emojis to use for the very first set that you proposed to NTT Docomo? And did you propose emoji to them, or did they suggest that you develop these and make these yourself?
で、その話なんですけど、まず200個ぐらい作れるということが分かってから、じゃあどういう絵文字を作ろうかっていうふうに考えたときに、絵文字の種類が3種類大きく、分けて3種類あるなと考えました。で、まず一つは、最初のきっかけ一つ目になったコンテンツをリッチに見せるっていう、いわゆるコンテンツ表示させるためにあった方がいいなと思う絵文字。具体的には、天気の絵文字。それから例えばスポーツの種類のようなニュースで使うような絵文字。それから街情報とかを表示する際の、ハサミで、美容院を、だったりとか、ハンバーガーみたいな、ハンバーガー店だったりとか、飲食店用の絵文字だったり、そういうような、情報に関係する絵文字っていうのが1種類目。2種類目が、さっきのきっかけの2つにあった、感情を表現するような絵文字。喜怒哀楽だったりとか、あとキラキラしてるマークだったり、いわゆるデコレーションするような、絵文字。最後が、これサービスに必要な、フリー、無料とか、ID とかパスワードとか、そういうサービスのプラットフォームとしてあった方が、そのサービス的に使いやすい絵文字。で、この3種類の中で、まずはよく汎用的にいそうな、まずそこでもうどんなコンテンツが提供されるとか、占いがあります。じゃあ占いのマーク入れましょうとか、ある程度、コンテンツが提供するコンテンツ決まってたんで、そこから使われそうなものをピックアップしました。で、絵文字に関して、メールに関し、つける感情の絵文字に関しては、これは、ベースになってるのは、日本の漫画がベースになっていて、漫画でよく記号だけで感情を表現するようなものが、文化が日本にはあって、汗のマークだったりとか、キラキラしてるマークだったりとか、そういうものを漫画の中からピックアップをして、それで選びました。っていうので、まずとにかく多分何百、最初は200には収まらないんで、何百、多分300とか400とか、集めた中から200に絞っていくことをやりました。これはもう全部自分で、やっています。
I want to hone in on one specific emoji that I've been kind of ruminating on for a long time, and that's the sparkles emoji. Am I correct that that was in the original set of emoji that you invented?
で、入ってて、あれはやっぱり漫画の表現なんですよね。漫画で例えばなんでしょうね、表情が輝いてる時とかに顔の近くにキラキラとか、物が物を強調して輝かせて見せたい時に、マークっていうのは昔から漫画で使われてたものを、絵文字に取り込んだものですね。
So at least in the United States, people have started over the last 5 to 10 years, or probably 3 to 5 years, using these sparkles emoji as like an emphasis emoji. So they'll say something like, I just did this and that's growth, and they'll put sparkles on either side of the emoji. Is that something that also happens in Japan at all? And did you ever expect that that particular emoji would be used for other reasons than the intended original use?
はしないです。日本ではなくて、日本が使うときは、後ろだけにつける。文末につけて、どちらかというとポジティブな、これはポジティブな、あなたへの意見というかコメントですよっていう、なんだろうな。多分ハートだと愛情になっちゃうし、びっくりだと強調になっちゃうんで、それでもない、どういう意味にしようかな。まあなんかふわっとポジティブな、ものとしてものすごく使い勝手がいい使われ方をしているので、ちょっとその使いわれ方の違いが面白いと思いました。
Something that has specifically interested me recently is that probably in the last 2 years, with the rise of artificial intelligence in the United States and around the world on the internet, AI companies have started using the sparkle emoji for new AI features. So now when they release a new feature or a new product and they call it something AI, they always put the sparkle emoji immediately after that. And have you seen that, or do you know a lot about that at all?
いや、いいこと、面白いと思いますよ。なので、まあ、アメリカのミームなのかな、何かそのイメージとしてキラキラが今 AI っていうその最先端なものにふさわしいからこれをつけてるっていうのは、絵文字っての使われ方の一つはやっぱり同じ価値観とか同じコンテキストを持ってる人たちの中でこれはこういう意味だよねっていう風に使われる使い方もあって、それがその全然違うカルチャーとか全然違うコンテキストがわからない人には通じないっていうものだったりするんで、そういうその使われ方としては正しいし非常に面白い現象だと思います。
Are you surprised at how these companies have like taken to use it for artificial intelligence, and like does that make sense to you in the context of the Japanese way of using the emoji?
基本的には面白いので肯定的なんですけど、なので、日本でもしそういう風になってもおかしくはない。全然日本人も受け入れられる、コンテキストだとは思います。はい。なんかのきっかけで、だから、例えば AI、日本でもいろいろいろんな AI が使われ始めてますけど、そういうその AI の会社がそのキラキラマークを必ずつけたりとかしてれば、日本でも、その AI にはキラキラつけるんだっていうふうに、もう刷り込まれていくので、そのうち自然になってくると思いますね。日本で使われてやっぱチャット GPT 使われてるんで、チャット GPT の最初にキラキラついてたら、みんな、もう AI キラキラなのって普通に思うと思います。
I can show you all of the every single
very interesting.
Tech company always all use them.
なのでなんだろうな、なのですでにあるものを絵文字に置き換えるっていうのが絵文字の役割なので、新しい AI の絵文字を作るはもうそれなんか新しいコーポレートロゴだったりとか、なんか0から1を作るものとまたちょっと違う、それはなんか絵文字というよりは単純にコーポレ CI デザインみたいなものなので、ちょっとそこが違うかなとは思います。
Is that emoji something that's being used with AI stuff in Japan already, or has it not gotten here yet?
日本ではまだ使われてないんですよ。なのでちょっとびっくりしました。でもアメリカがそうだといずれそうなるかもしれないですね。
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so at this point, we have traced the sparkle emoji all the way back to 1997. And it turns out that in Japan, at least, they have a pretty concrete meaning, right? They don't mean AI. They're not used for irony. They mean like glamour or beauty or cuteness. And there's not even really a direct English translation for them. The closest you're gonna get is kira kira or bishi sparkles. So now that we know what this icon was originally supposed to be used for, I think we can finally start to move forward to figure out how it went from this to this. And fortunately enough, I know a few people that might have a lot of insight on this.
It's part of what I would call the vocabulary of Japanese visual language, which is fairly uniform across media.
This is Neil Cohn. He runs the Visual Language Lab, and he also happens to be the guy that designed the melting face and the disappearing face emojis, so I think we can trust him.
In Japan, the Japanese visual language of essentially what looks like manga is everywhere. Like it's on all the instruction manuals look like manga. All the literature looks like manga. It's not to say it's the only graphic style that exists there.
The Japanese visual language of manga and anime is on everything. It is everything. It's in the subway and instruction manuals and the immigration part of the airport. It's really deeply embedded into their culture. I mean, just watch what Mr. Kurita said one more time.
メールに関しつけるその感情の絵文字に関しては、これはベースになってるのは日本の漫画がベースになっていて、漫画でよくその記号だけで感情を表現するようなものが
Japan developed this culture of icons and symbols representing their emotions and things like manga and anime. And because manga is such a huge part of their visual language, those icons and symbols eventually just made their way into their culture in general. And that led to some pretty interesting developments.
Sparkles are what I would call a visual affix. They have to attach to something else. Believe plus ubble. Ubble is the affix. The sparkles in the original context are affixes, meaning they have to attach to something to indicate that thing as being cute.
Manga has a ton of these visual affixes, these emotional cues that help you know exactly what the characters are feeling. Like, have you ever seen this or this? These are both Japanese visual affixes, and they only have the meaning they do because they've been contextualized by Japanese visual culture. But do you remember how we got emoji in the first place? In 2008, those Google engineers and Unicode didn't want to create a whole new set of emoji because, again, the entire point of emoji is that we're all able to communicate without any encoding errors or like emoji bake. So they just took everything that Japan had already done and added them to their emoji. So suddenly, the rest of the world using Unicode had to contend with these icons and symbols and visual affixes that they didn't have any context for. I mean, seriously, go look through your emoji keyboard right now. You're going to see a ton of symbols that you don't have any context for. You see yen constantly. You see a bunch of references to Japan. It's wild, right? So when you see something like this that you don't have any pre-existing context for, there's a couple of different ways that your brain can interpret it. The first way is through something called iconicity. That's when the icon just means what it looks like. Like, think about the sun. It is just a sun. It means the sun. But then there's something called symbolicity, which means, yeah, the icon could have a literal meaning, but there's also additional symbolic meaning right on top. So, for example, that sun could also symbolically mean happy. In our conversation, Neil specifically mentioned the light bulb. Like, it is a literal light bulb, but at least where I'm from, it also means inspiration. Or something even like the skull emoji, right? Like right now, people are using the skull emoji to mean humor or like a form of existential dread. But it also is a literal skull, right? That symbolicity is super contextual. It's very localized culturally. Now, the internet is kind of like a giant culture, and if you're part of that, maybe you do see these icons changing over time. But there's so many things that are so specific to small groups that you're not going to understand what they mean at all when you see them. The skull emoji is actually a pretty good example of that. It started with, "That's so funny, I'm dying," and it changed to "I'm dying," which changed to "I'm dead," which went to dead, and then just the skull emoji. We've got a lot of symbols that started out that way, like the cap emoji, fire, popcorn. The meaning of symbols change at the speed of culture. But what happens when you don't understand the context of an icon? Like, for example, recently I saw the cap emoji for the first time, and I didn't know what it meant, and I felt real dumb. And the only thing that I could fall back on was the iconicity of the cap emoji, which was a literal hat, and that's clearly not what it means. In the case of these Japanese visual affixes, there's nothing to fall back on because they don't actually represent anything real. They're more emotional cues. Like this icon. It's not a real thing. It's just used to represent cuteness or beauty. Or like the anger icon. I mean, it was originally a popping vein on someone's head. Then that got conventionalized enough to become this on someone's head. Then that became conventionalized enough to be on a rock and make the rock angry. And now it's just the icon for anger. But the sparkles are an interesting one, right? Because they're not technically something that exists in real life, but they are something that something else does. Like water glimmers, stars twinkle. Maybe that's why Samsung used them as fireworks?
When it was first introduced to the Western world, people began to use it not quite in this way, but as a kind of decoration across, posts on various social platforms.
That was Keith Broney. He runs Emojipedia, and he's been an insanely valuable resource, especially with the fact checking. When the sparkles emoji first got exported to the rest of the world, people started using it in this fun, decorative way. Because what does it resemble? Well, one thing could be glitter, right? It kind of shines. And just like you might put glitter on your name tag at a party, people started putting digital glitter on their digital name tags. We didn't have the context of kira kira, which is supposed to be cuteness or beauty or glamour. So we just had to lean on the iconicity of the sparkles, which is shininess. It shines. A lot of things shine. It's a pretty adaptable emoji.
You know, what's great, I think, about sparkle is it means nothing and everything. It's very contextually dependent, and that allows people to imbue it with meaning.
I also talked to Jennifer Daniel for this story. She's the current chair of the emoji subcommittee of the Unicode Consortium. Long phrase, I know. Also a designer at Google. And if you like Emoji Kitchen, she did that too.
I think that flexibility, like on its own, what is a sparkle? What does that mean, really? Like, sure, it means magic, I guess. But like in a sentence, like, it was so great to see you, it sounds so sarcastic. It has such range. It has such range.
People used the sparkles for digital decoration for a long time, but as culture changed and the internet became more prevalent, Western culture became a lot more sarcastic, a lot more ironic. And at some point in the last few years, this self-deprecating kind of existential dread humor took over. This is basically the humor of Gen Z. Nothing is serious.
The thing about a sarcastic mark is like the whole humor of sarcasm is that it's ambiguous. Right? Like you don't actually know if they're being serious or not, or if they are being sarcastic. And so when you have to explain it, it takes all the air out of the bite of sarcasm. So when you look at the glyphs like sparkles, it's denoting sarcasm without screaming, I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah. I mean, the tension of bookending something inherently not sparkly, not shiny with sparkles, I mean, that's funny. So then how did it get to AI? Here's my thesis. We only have emoji because of Japan. And Japan's visual language has all of these visual affixes that we don't necessarily have a contextualized understanding for in other cultures. So when they got exported to Unicode, we got faced with all these icons that we don't really understand. And some of them we're probably never gonna understand because they're pretty much purely symbolic. But some of them, like I guess the sparkle emoji, we can reuse and add our own contextualized understanding on top. It's gone from digital glitter to irony and sarcasm, but its iconic meaning of shininess and sparkliness and look over here and a little bit of magic, I think that's exactly what these companies want you to think about it. And now I guess here we are. I still don't really know who was the first one to do this, but believe me, I'm gonna keep looking. But I figured it might be worth getting Mr. Kurita's perspective on this too.
いやでも結局のところ今のキラキラはすごく一つの答えだと思っていて、全く何のその新しいオリジナルのマークを例えば作ってもそれが流行ればみんなそうだと思うんですね。ただそれは全くオリジナルだとその流行るのに時間がかかる、だからそのみんなに浸透するのは時間がかかるので、例えば今のスパークリングのようなみんなが印象を持っていて、その印象が AI の印象に近いものを置き換えるっていうのが一番なんだろうな、クレバーな選択なんじゃないかなと思います。
And you know what? I guess if Mr. Kurita's cool with it, I'm just gonna have to deal with it. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next time I've got something to say. See ya. Oh, so also these interviews were really cool, really valuable. So I uploaded them all to another channel that I'll link in the description. It's my extras channel. I think it's called David and Mel Extras. So if you want to check that out, subscribe, do whatever you want to do, go for it. See you guys in the next one.